Hello friends, it's me, Tim, your favorite sex educator. I just wanted to hop on here really quick before we start the show for a few announcements. First, I wanted to let you know about Love Shop. They've been a friend of the pod and a friend of my own personal brand for quite a while now, and I love them so much and I love everything that they do. They just opened a new location here in Toronto at 500 Yonge Street, and if you go there during their opening weekend, which is still happening right now, they can give you $25 off of a fully priced item, which is like insane. I bought like my Pride outfit. It ran up to like $31.99, and with a coupon I ended up paying only like $7, which is so cool. Once more, that's Love Shop at 500 Yonge Street. All you Torontonians know. Second, I wanted to remind you that I do have a voicemail service. If you check in the description in the show notes, you will see how to access the voicemail. Leave me a quick note. I can answer any of your questions. It's like you have 90 seconds to vent, to ask a question. Like, I don't need to hear your life story, but just, send me your love or whatever it is that you have on your mind, and I'm going to play it on the air. So yeah, really cool feature. And finally, I wanted to talk about my guest very, very quickly. Her name is Elizabeth Hendrick, who is a author and a kink connoisseur, as she talks about in her book, and she's great. She just won a whole bunch of awards. It's so like prestigious, I think is the word. Yeah, prestigious. Like she just won first place actually for the Indie Excellence Awards in sexuality, and then second place in both the national and international book awards for LGBTQ nonfiction. And then she also won second place for the best cover in nonfiction. So it's really, really good, this book. I read it. I cannot recommend it enough. It is a difficult read for those of you who are a little more squeamish, but I promise you it is worth it. I will put the link in the show notes on how to get her book. And I just hope you enjoy the conversation that we have today. So without further ado, let's start the show. The Sex Ed with Tim podcast is recorded on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands.
You're listening to Sex Ed with Tim.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sex Ed with Tim podcast. I'm your host, Tim, certified sex educator, your local chaotic homosexual, and what do you call a vegan who is into humiliation play? Biodegradable. Okay, I don't think that's going to make the cut for this episode. Thank you to whoever submitted that joke, that pun. I don't think it's... Yeah, you know what? We'll keep it. Good job. I have the worst audience, Elizabeth. Yeah, they have the dumbest jokes they submit to me on Reddit. But if that joke was a hint to what we're going to be talking about today, we are going to be talking all about BDSM and kink, and more specifically, a book all about BDSM and kink and the author's experiences, her memoir, Exodai, by Elizabeth Hendrick, who I have with me today. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you doing?
Hello, Tim. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, because It did take me a while to read the book. Let me be clear. It was a little bit of a journey. So for those of you listening, one more time, the book is called Exodai, and the tagline is a shockingly honest memoir of love, obsession, and torture. It took me a while to read through this because of the amount of graphic imagery and the sort of emotions that Elizabeth takes us through. So I'm going to say it right now, trigger warnings all around. We're probably going to talk about what happened in the book and all of its graphic imagery. So, but don't let me explain it. I'm going to let Elizabeth explain. So Elizabeth, can you please introduce yourself to my audience?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, as you can hear from my accent, I'm British. I'm currently living in Tokyo, and it's in Tokyo where I first got into the BDSM scene. I moved out here for the first time aged 27. And I was a lesbian struggling with my sexuality. I hadn't accepted myself as a lesbian woman. And so I had this inner lack of confidence and inner insecurity. But I was going to plenty of lesbian nightclubs and not having much luck. And it was at one of these nightclubs that I met a lady called Junko. Well, she's called Junko in the book. That's a pseudonym, but we'll call her Junko here. And she was at this lesbian nightclub because she was bisexual, but she was very into fetish. And she was the most amazingly dressed person in the room. And basically, she introduced me. She was my mentor, my mother chicken mentor, who took me under her wing and led me into the BDSM scene, for which I have no regrets, because there's a really fascinating and euphoric side to BDSM, and you really can reach nirvana and bliss if you do it right. I had some very positive experiences, but roll forward about 15 years, I had been all over the world, lived back in London, then lived in the Middle East, and I ended up back in Tokyo, which is where I've stayed since. So I moved back to Tokyo in 2013 and got heavily embroiled in this relationship with a Japanese dominatrix. And I properly became her slave, her private slave. And it really was a total immersement into slavery in the BDSM context. So I was allowed to go to work and do my job, but 24/7 on a social front, I became this woman's slave. And it was there was a lot of physical torture in the beginning, which I describe very graphically in the book, as Tim mentioned. And there was perhaps a lot more of mental torture. And there you get the emotions that I'm going through. And what was amazing is that it was basically through this relationship that I came through the other side and eventually learned to love myself. And I put myself into this position of misery, where I was trying to get recognition from the woman who was the least likely to give me recognition. And I basically, at a subconscious level, thought I needed to be punished. And so I put myself onto this platform where she was able to totally take advantage of me. And it essentially was an abusive relationship, but an abusive relationship that I was consenting to, because I had this lack of self-love. But through that relationship, she took me to the absolute ground zero of submission, from where I had no crutches. I had nothing to hold on to. I'd almost lost my job. I was utterly extended financially on all my credit cards. I'd lost all my self-esteem. And from that deep, dark place of despair, these green shoots of recovery started to grow inside me as my inner child started to breathe. And I had stripped back everything. And through this relationship, I started to learn to love myself. And I came out the other side. And I actually split up with Tomo. Her name is Tomo, the Japanese dominatrix. I split up with her because although I loved her, I said, I've learned to love myself in this relationship and I can no longer be with you. So the journey, the book is basically a story of me coming to terms with my sexuality. But the second half of the book focuses very heavily on this BDSM relationship that I had in Japan with this Japanese, very cruel, sadistic Japanese dominatrix. And there's about 2 or 3 chapters that describe some of the torture sessions, the physical torture sessions that we entered into together. And a few people have likened me to Stephen King as an author because of my graphic detail. And it is very, very raw. I mean, I tell the story with unflinching honesty. And I put myself out there. I think there's not much self-pity. So I think a lot of readers are enjoying it because of its raw honesty and the emotional journey. And they're swept away by the graphic torture scenes. Although, yeah, trigger warnings, some people have to put the book down, just take a break and come back to it. I mean, it's a bit like watching a car crash and you have to turn your head away a few times and then come back to it because we all rub our neck and want to see what happens, right? So that's the kind of book it is. It's very, very raw.
You can't help but like keep looking at this sort of car crash, as you put it. And I was just like, I guess the way I would describe it was, first, it's like a slow burn, because you do talk about in the first half, your experiences with your first kiss and your first orgasm. And then the latter half of the book is very much like the relationship that you had with Tomo. And that's where it gets a little graphic. So we're going to get there in a second. But I wanted to ask first how you got to writing this book and why you decided to start from a very specific part in your life and how you decided to end it. So why start with your first orgasm, first kiss?
Well, that's a good question. So originally, the first draft of this book was just the story of my relationship with Tomo. And the book's been through various transformations. So I first wrote the first draft in 2015, and I had come out of the relationship. I split up with Tomo at the end of 2014, and although I'd learned to love myself, my life was in a mess, and I was living in Tokyo, and I was made redundant because I wasn't delivering at the office. And fortunately, I could claim benefit for 6 months, and amazingly, through a friend in the choir, I had an opportunity to go and live for free in a mountain chalet near Mount Fuji, and I just spent 6 months writing the first draft. And it was really, I had kept diaries of the relationship because incredible weird stuff was happening at a spiritual level as well. I mean, there was amazing things. I was on this very high vibration spiritually, and it was just like angels kept leading me to do this and do that. And there was a constant delusional battle between whether I should give up because I knew it was a toxic relationship or whether it was the noble course to stick with the relationship. So I'd kept a diary, and this diary was huge. It was all on my computer. And I spent those 6 months in this mountain cabin in complete solitude. It was wonderful. It was perfect. And I was staying there for free. And I wrote the first draft of the book, which was predominantly the story of my relationship with Tomo. And that was bursting out of me. It was actually a cathartic process to write that first draft. And I didn't necessarily need to publish it, but I thought the story was so amazing that I ought to put it out there. And I got my first book agent in September of 2015, who was actually a US book agent. And he was my agent for 2 years, but unfortunately he was unable to sign up a publisher. And then I kind of terminated my contract with him, and I found a new book agent, I think in 2018, who was a UK book agent. His name's Andrew Lowney, and he's very big. He was a very big book agent, an independent book agent in London, in Westminster, who did biographies and memoirs, and he's a biographer himself. He writes books. And he said, I think you've got an interesting story, but I think you need to write much more to introduce yourself and why you would be in this relationship, and you need to end the story so that there's a whole arc of a story of coming to terms with your sexuality. And he put me in touch with a very reputable editor called Jeremy Dronfield, who's actually written quite a lot about the Holocaust, and he likened Tomo in my book to some of the German Nazi torturers, in that they would torture people to their death. And he said, given the opportunity, he felt that Tomo in my book would have tortured me to death if it had been a legitimate thing to do. I mean, under the guise of war crime, you can get away with it, although you shouldn't. So Jeremy Johnfield and I worked together on this book, and it was all my independent writing, but he was mentoring me. And his main advice was about memoirs, is that unless you're a celebrity already and people know you, nobody knows who the hell you are from Adam. And you need to introduce yourself to the reader and bring them in on the journey. And you need to go back to your childhood and where this was all coming from. And you've got to build that up and build that emotional journey. So that's why I started in my childhood and talked about me realizing that I was gay and how that affected me and how my peers reacted to me at the time. And I'm 52 now, so this was 40 years ago in East England in a regular private all-girls school, white Caucasian, very traditional, sang a hymn to God at assembly, said a prayer, Christian tradition. And a woman loving another woman was very, very alien. And so I started to the self-loathing and self-hatred and self-disgust and shame and guilt started in my adolescence when I was 13, started periods and realized that I hadn't turned into a woman that loved man. I was still a woman that loved women. And my class reacted very negatively to that. Nobody bullied me, but I was ostracized. And that led to all this internal hatred and guilt. And so that's very much why I've included that first half of the book and how that develops. And in taking me to my first relationship, my first kiss, interestingly, my first relationship, when my girlfriend finally turned around to me and said, "I love you too," I was completely thrown because I didn't think anybody could I didn't think anybody could love me because I didn't love myself. So those are all component parts in the journey of me coming to terms with my sexuality. Why didn't I love myself in the first place? That's important. And then how it manifested in my adult life. I was just having hopeless luck in relationships. And it wasn't that it was hopeless luck. It was that I was attracting that because I didn't love myself. And then this led me down the path of BDSM because I had a natural interest in bondage, and my natural interest in bondage is still there. I still love to be tied up, but I don't want to be enslaved. And I didn't actually like pain. I wasn't a masochist. I suffered pain to give pleasure to the woman who was beating me up. So that's really why I had that intro. It's to bring the reader in on who I am, where I'm coming from, and why I would end up in such a relationship as I did.
Mm-hmm. That is an origin story that is all too familiar with any gay audience that's listening to this right now. You know, when you're brought up in a fundamental Christian or any sort of religious household and you're trying to find your ways to kind of like express your same-sex attraction in very small, subtle ways without the religious superiors seeing you. So you're like, oh, how do I tell this girl or this guy that I like them? And then like also not get in trouble with the priests and the nuns and my parents. So I relate to that so hard.
Well, it's interesting actually because a lot of my reviews have come in. A lot of readers from the LGTB community have been really praising the book for its relatability, particularly in these early chapters when I'm grappling with my sexuality. I mean, I was sitting there with my Christian friend, age 13, in lunch hour at school, praying to God to make me straight. Because as far as I was concerned, I was an abomination before God. I mean, it's just such ridiculous concept, and it destroyed me. I was so miserable because of my sexuality, because I didn't think it was acceptable to be gay. And what's so sad is that that's the go-to position for most cultures across the world, is that being gay is an abomination before God. I mean, you try and be gay in Saudi Arabia, you try and be gay in Africa, especially in the religious Christian community in Africa. Oh my word. And all of this is coming from the Bible, all this misogyny and homophobia, and I think it's tragic. And one of my purposes, I mean, if this book builds me a big enough platform, I really want to be an evangelist for being gay before God is okay. You know, I want to dispel this perpetual myth that the religions are propagating to society, and it's getting stronger and stronger.
I would love to see you on TV preaching, gay is okay.
It's okay to be gay before God.
Yeah. Also,
Oh, God.
I'm pretty sure God has more important things to worry about than who you're attracted to. Like,
Quite
let's
right.
be
And
real.
God he's not out
War,
there.
famine.
God is not judgmental. He's within all of us. God is love, consciousness, and light. And there's no wrath. There's no judgment. There's no prejudice. It's just shocking how people use religion to manipulate. And it's all based on fear. It's based on fear of the unknown. And people just can't step out of their comfort zones. I would have been homophobic. If I hadn't been gay, I would have been homophobic because of my upbringing. And I'm not blaming my parents. We were just very traditional Christians. And I would have been the most homophobic person in the room if I hadn't been gay myself. And that forced me out of my comfort zone. But needless to say, I didn't love myself, and properly at a subconscious level, I didn't love myself till I was in my 40s as a lesbian woman. And then my life got much better. Once you learn to love yourself, it's the most important thing you can do, is learn to love yourself and fully accept and embrace who you are.
I would say that I'm homophobic in the sense that all men disgust me. Ugh.
That's funny.
They're so unbearable. So you talk, the way you talk about religion is fascinating to me, because I'm agnostic. And the reason being is because I was brought up Catholic, and I treasure my own sexual identity more than what any church could tell me. So I wanted to ask you about how you reconcile your religion with your sexual orientation, as well as your kink lifestyle. Like, was there any sort of conflict of interest among those three, or how you found this sort of balance to fit all three together as part of who you are?
Well, that's an interesting question. So actually, there are three sides to me. There's my BDSM side, my submissive side. There's my sexuality side, as a lesbian woman, and there's my spirituality side as previously as a Christian. And now I'm not actually 100% a Christian anymore. I try to be Christ-like, but I accept all religion and I reject all religion. I'm a bit more New Age these days, just into energy and consciousness. But when I was a Christian, I was a very devout Christian in my teens, and that was when it became manifest that I was a lesbian woman. Became obvious that I was a lesbian woman, and those two sides of my psyche were very much at loggerheads, because I, as a naive young adolescent, and I was very naive, my interpretation of the Bible and everything that I read about being gay as a Christian just couldn't seem to endorse. I couldn't get a stamp of approval on my sexuality, and so I was constantly at loggerheads with my sexuality. Now, fast forward to the age of 27, 28. When I got into the BDSM scene in Tokyo, by then I was a much more mature Christian. And by then I'd already had conversations with priests who had said to me, it's okay to be gay. God, God is the potter, you are the clay. So consciously I had by then accepted my sexuality, and I started exploring BDSM. Now, at the same time as I was exploring BDSM, I was very heavily involved in the local Anglican church in Tokyo called St. Albans. And I was actually on the prayer net in the church. And I was part of a group of 7 people who would go away and make prayers of healing for people who were suffering in the church, whether mentally or physically. And the prayer net, I mean, we wouldn't just pray about healing, but that was one of the main ministries. So I would have this list of people, and I would take it home with me, and I would have a prayer session. And I would pray about these people and bring them before God. One was an Iranian man who'd been ostracized by his family because he'd converted to Christianity, and they were threatening to kill him if he came back to Iran. Another was a woman with breast cancer, and she was going through the chemo. So I was holding these people in prayer. Now, what I found was that I was going to BDSM clubs and finding my favorite mistress in one of my favorite clubs to give me a beating with the whip. And I would reach this kind of spiritual euphoria. Now, a lot of submissives call this subspace. And when I got into my subspace, my trance state, because I was taking so much pain from the whip, that my brain would start to emit endorphins. And I would get into this subspace, but I used that subspace to have communion with God. So I would take the prayers of the congregation with me into these S&M bars, get into this spiritual high under the whip, and say my prayers. And those were the most powerful prayers I ever said, were the prayers I said under the whip. It's mortification of the flesh. And this is what the monks of old were doing and still do with self-flagellation. And I was effectively becoming a monk who was self-flagellating, but not self-flagellation. I was getting a dominatrix to do it for me, to offer prayers to God. So from a spiritual point of view, I never loathed myself because of my BDSM interest. So I never had a problem integrating my BDSM part of my psyche with my Christianity. The only issue is loving myself as a lesbian woman. But and as I said, I didn't learn to love myself properly at a subconscious level till I was in my 40s, because I was hardwired to hate myself as a lesbian woman. But none of that hardwiring had happened about my BDSM side of my sexuality. So I was a very confident submissive, and I seemed to attract some of the best dominatrices in Tokyo who wanted to play with me. Whereas as a lesbian, I was hopeless because I didn't love myself as a lesbian woman. So it's very, very interesting. Christianity kind of ruined my experience as a lesbian woman, but by the time I explored BDSM, I was able to literally integrate that very deeply with my spirituality, and was literally praying on my hands and knees, the prayers of my congregation under the whip in S&M bars.
I love that because, well, okay, I've never been that deep into the kink space, although I have had my share of kink through escorting, through my own like sex life. You know, I ask my partner to choke me a little bit and slap me around. However, I can relate to the element of pain sending you into this sort of euphoric state. And I can remember it happening very recently, and this was during a tattoo appointment where
Excellent.
I was
that would
tattooed.
Work. Yep.
Yeah, so it hurts for anyone that's listening that's never had a tattoo. It hurts, like especially if you're getting a tattoo done for 24 hours.
Where did you get your tattoo?
24 hours on my bicep. This really
Lovely.
big piece.
Oh, he's
here.
showing it to me now. It's beautiful.
Yes,
wow, that's a piece of art. It looks like the Mona Lisa.
Yes, thank you so much. It took not 24 consecutive hours, but like 3 sessions broken down into 8 hours each. However, there was a point where the pain was just so much that I started to almost enter this trance, this sort of like meditative like state. So I know what you're talking about. Actually, there was a point where the tattoo artist was like, you fell asleep for like 2 hours. And I was like, oh, wow. I didn't even realize that.
Wow.
Yeah. So I completely get it. It is hard to replicate that sort of feeling. But I wanted to talk about the first time that you had that, which was actually, you talk about that in chapter 8, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, chapter 8. Yeah. Gosh, I'm impressed. You know my book better
I'm
than
a good
me
host. I'm a good host. I do my research. I do my books. So this was, I believe, your first fetish party that you attended in Japan. So I was wondering if you can talk about that and what that was like.
Right. So, chapter 8 sees me going to a carol concert because I was a alto singer on it. It was this Sunday. I will tell you the date. It was the 15th of December, 2002. And I had my first, it was such a life-changing experience that I know the date. And it was a Sunday evening, and I had been to sing, being December, I had been to sing a carol concert. And after the carol concert, I rushed off from this chapel and went to this investment banker's swanky apartment, expatriate apartment in Tokyo. And he had invited, so I'd actually been on the fetish scene for about a year, but I hadn't been involved in any serious play, and I hadn't been to any serious parties. This was my first serious behind the scenes hardcore party. And I arrived at his house, and there's leather furniture all over his sofa, leather sheets all over his furniture. I walked in, and the first thing, I mean, I was a bit late because I'd been to this Carol concert beforehand, and I arrived, and the first thing I saw was this man dressed head to toe in purple latex with a huge hood, a bubble hood, all inflated, and he was strapped into this chair, and this big, one of the most famous dominatrices in Tokyo was dominating him and teasing him. And it was just full on straight from the moment I walked in the room. Anyway, during the course of that evening, I knew some of the people there. There was a Finnish girl who features in my book, called Astrid in the book. And she said about 2 hours into the party, "Now it's your turn to be tied up, Elizabeth." Now, of course, I had been hoping to get involved, but once you face the gauntlet, you kind of want to run a mile. And I ran to the toilet to go and reckon with myself. And I thought, oh, do I really want to do this? I thought, come on, let's throw caution to the wind. And so I went ahead. And so Astrid tied me up. And then it just became the focus of the room somehow, and like an initiation of Elizabeth. And so once I'd been tied up, they paraded me around the room a bit. So my legs were free. And then they put me over the sofa onto Mark Sunderland's lap. He was the host of the party, again, a pseudonym. And he pulled off my tartan skirt, which was very weakly attached, and pulled back my knickers and started spanking me, saying, "You've been a very naughty girl." Because I had gone dressed as a schoolgirl, you see, because I didn't have any fetish gear. So a lot of people dress up as schoolgirls for kink in Japan. It's quite a kinky society. Anyway, so I'd gone as a schoolgirl, and he ripped off my tartan skirt, pulled back my knickers. Knickers, I think they call them something else in America, Canada.
Undergarments, underwear.
Undergarments.
Yeah.
The final undergarment to cover the pussy. Anyway, we call them knickers in England. Anyway, he pulled them back and started spanking me, saying, "You've been a very naughty girl." And then he suddenly says, "I think we should whip Elizabeth." And of course, his proposal was met with approval and enthusiasm. But of course, it was a consensual environment. So, he looked at me, say, "Are you okay to be whipped?" And I thought, well, I don't really like pain, so I think I'm going to abort. And just as I was about to say, "I don't think so," just as I was about to say no, I caught the eye of a Japanese girl in the room at the other end of the table, sitting very quietly, but sitting very comfortably and looking very happy that I was being humiliated. And it just caught my eye, and she had this amazing aura. Wasn't especially attractive as a woman, but her energy just got me. And I thought, you know what? She can whip me. I'll be whipped, but only by her. And it turns out her name is Nozomi. So this was my first BDSM S&M experience. And so I went over to Nozomi, and she gave her the horse crop, handed it to her like a dog handing over a newspaper. And then she was very pleased. She took off her gloves, sipped her champagne, looked at me. Then she slapped me hard across the face a few times to just assert her authority. And then she got me to bend over and began whipping me. And immediately I found it was very painful. And I thought, oh God, I can't. This is embarrassing. I'm going to have to give up as soon as I've started. But I noticed how much she was enjoying it. And I thought, well, she's enjoying it, so I'll stick with it a bit longer. And the more I stuck with it, the more pain I was in, the more she enjoyed it. And the more she enjoyed it, that more I was motivated to suffer the pain. And finally, I stopped her and I said, "Look, this is a little whip. Don't you have something better?" I don't know how I had the instinct to do that. It was purely instinctive. And I just said to her, "Haven't you got a better whip?" And she was so happy. And she went to her handbag, her huge bag of tools, and pulled out this long snake type bullwhip, leather braid bullwhip. It was about 1 meter and a bit long. And she pulled me by the scruff of my neck to the middle of the playroom, and basically started to whip my buttocks and thighs and lower back and all over. And she rolled me on the floor like a baker rolling pastry. I'm quoting my book now. And she just beat the bejesus out of me. And I just kept enduring it, even though it was excruciatingly painful. but she kind of took me over this threshold. And then I started to get into this subspace, and I was enduring it because I saw how much pleasure it was giving her. And I literally jumped in with both feet at the very deep end of BDSM and had this 4-hour whipping session. I mean, probably 2 to 3 hours, but with the breaks in between and the euphoria. Absolutely amazing experience. And it was funny because I'd been singing this beautiful piece of music 6 hours earlier at the Carol concert, and it started replaying in my head. And it was Ave Maria by John Parsons, and it was just replaying in my head. And I felt like I had all these angels singing, and I literally felt like I had been born again through this experience with Nozomi. And I had discovered myself, and I realized I was a submissive, and that was me. I was a submissive even before I was a lesbian. And it was just this incredible, like, scales falling from the eyes, revelation, born again experience. And it's all documented in chapter 8. It's a very exciting chapter. So buy the book just for that chapter. And anyway, that was my first experience. And from that, I never looked back. I kind of left the gay scene and just went into the S&M scene, because the BDSM scene is very, very asexual, very multisexual. So you don't, certainly in Japan, you don't really have lesbian BDSM clubs. You do have gay male BDSM clubs, and they're very, very hardcore, but a lot of gay men go to the sort of mainstream BDSM parties in Tokyo too. And it was I just was so comfortable. I was a total duck to water in the BDSM scene. And as I said, I was naturally self-confident in my sexuality as a BDSM submissive. And so I attracted the right people to have a relationship with.
Yeah, chapter 8 is a heck of a chapter, because the way you describe it, it almost seems like it could be turned into a movie. And now that you said Ave Maria, I can kind of imagine Ave Maria playing in the background as you're being whipped like
right.
a piñata. Like that's an artistic piece of film that I would love to see if this book ever gets a movie adaptation.
I hope so. It's very cinematic. Everybody, all of the influential people in the industry who have read this book or come across it, all my book agents, everybody thinks it's ready. It's film worthy. It's so cinematic. I mean, there's scenes of me swimming in the sea in Dubai, the Persian Gulf. There's I meet Tomo in Bali. I mean, it's very exotic, and most of the book is based in Tokyo, of course. So it is, and there are lots of different scenes and the settings and everything. It would be hard to do as a theatre production, but it would be great to do as a movie, and film it on-site locations and everything. And even, the time I was in England as well, it's quite interesting too.
We'll be right back after this commercial break. Yes!
Hey, you sick motherfuckers! I've got a special treat for you. Need a new toy to spice up your sex life? Head over to loveshop.ca/sexedwithtim and get yourself a cock ring, a dildo, a vibrator, or even a life-sized sex doll. Damn, I guess love really does come in all shapes and sizes. Get 15% off your entire order when you use code SEXEDWITHTIM at checkout. They're shipping to all of Canada and the United States because North America is horny. That's loveshop.ca/sexedwithtim and use code SEXEDWITHTIM for 15% off your entire purchase. Happy orgasm! Do you like feeling sexy and looking sexy? Of course you do. Only my listeners are sexy as fuck. I have partnered with fetishwear designer Dale Kuda to bring you the hottest deals on custom jockstraps, harnesses, hats, and more. Head over to dalekuda.com, that's DALEKUDA.com, and use code SEXEDWITHTIM at checkout for 25% off the entire store. Yeah, you heard me. 25% off. And cherry on top, free shipping. Oh my god. I have a few of the stuff that he has made for me, and Girl, I'm wearing it right now. I'm wearing like a little jock strap so that I could easily just like slip a little butt plug or dildo every now and then here and there. And I'm on the train. I'm just like, thank you, Dale. That's DaleCuda.com with the code SEXEDWithTim for 25% off your entire purchase with free shipping. With a deal like that, I swear I could come buckets, honey.
The show is about to begin. Yes.
There are a few scenes in the book, or not scenes, there are a few chapters in the book where I was clutching my pearls a little bit. And this is coming from me, a sex educator who has had upwards of 2,000 sexual partners and 4 years of escorting. And I was still like, oh my goodness. And when I say I was clutching my pearls a little bit, I'm referring to some of the scenes, like, for those listening, it's about to get a little graphic. The one with the needles in your nail beds.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk about that? Because that
Sure.
Not only was that graphic, but also it was bringing to mind this one question that kept ringing in my head was, how do you know when to keep going? Because there were times when I felt like you were self-abandoning for the sake of your dom, your top, your master's pleasure. So how did you know to, like, because it felt like you were almost letting go of your ability to consent in order to just please her. So
I did.
Yeah,
I did let go.
Oh, you did, yeah.
Yeah, so we didn't really have a safe word. I mean, there was one occasion when we were playing and she had suspended me from the ceiling, and the way I was bound, all with rope. I mean, being bound to the ceiling and hanging is actually quite torturous. It's very painful, and your blood circulation goes numb in a lot of parts, and it can last. The numbness can last for weeks afterwards. I never had that kind of difficult encounter, but when I was once suspended from the ceiling, all bound up in rope, I actually started to feel faint. And I said in Japanese, "Kimochi ga warui chotto de," which means I'm feeling a bit weird. I'm feeling a bit dizzy. And although that wasn't a safe word and we didn't use safe words, she understood, okay, we need to get her down. We need to get her down right now, and we need to get blood into her head because she's about to faint. And if you faint during a BDSM session, it just pulls all the energy out of the session. It's very difficult to get going again. So we stopped that part. She got my head between my knees, got the blood back, and as soon as I was better, she was off again, torturing my nipples. But that's a scene in the book. But in regards to the consent, I basically consented, and she pushed me as far as she thought she could. Really, she kind of didn't go. She took me well beyond my limit, without question. If we had used safe words, I would have used my safe word way before where she took me. But I could still endure it, and it was. Two things were driving that. One was love, and the other was lunacy, and lack of self-love. So
love and lunacy normally go hand in hand.
Well, there was this sonnet, you see. I talk about this Shakespeare sonnet. Love bears out even beyond doom. And I mean, love is a very blind, stupid, delusional thing at times, and there's a lot of delusion in my book, and in the latter chapters, when I'm trying to discern whether or not I should stay in the relationship or not, I tell myself this delusion that I'm here to save her from her inner demons, and I've tricked myself into thinking I was on this noble path to save Tomo from her inner demons. And there's even a scene where I think I'm going to exorcise her demon. And I'm just so deluded. But I thought I'd convinced myself it was the nobler path to take. And basically I was addicted to torture. And so my mind was tricking myself to stay in the relationship. And it was incredible, the levels of delusion that go on in the human mind. But this scene with the needles in the fingernails. So when I was with my first mistress, Nozomi, and having sessions with Nozomi like years before, and this was in 2003, Nozomi and I had talked about putting a needle in a fingernail because I thought, wow, that's a really amazing kind of Japanese torture. And we both thought we'd like to experience it. So on one occasion, she put a needle in my ring finger's nail when we were having a session. And I have to say, it sounds excruciating, but it really wasn't as painful as you would have thought. It's just like having a needle, an injection when you get your teeth done. It really looks so incredible, but it wasn't actually as painful as we hoped it would be. Interestingly enough, anyway, I had done that with Nozomi, and I had mentioned this to Tomo. And Tomo was always very jealous of Nozomi. I don't know why, because it was a relationship that had happened 10 years before I met Tomo. But Tomo seemed to always have this jealousy that somehow, maybe when I talked about Nozomi, I was a bit more energetic. And they do always say, when you're in a relationship, don't talk about your previous partners. And I mean, she asked me questions. Anyway, she had put this on her bucket list of things to do, put needles in Elizabeth's fingers. And of course, because Nozomi had only put one, Tomo wanted to go one step further. So she decided she would put 3 needles in my fingers. And she decided she didn't know whether she would put three needles in one finger or one needle in each of 3 fingers. And in the end, she did 1 needle in each of 3 fingers. And we were at a party, and it was just a friend's party, a social party with Junko, who had originally introduced me to BDSM, and Junko and Tomo were best friends. And there were about 25 people at this party. It was after midnight. The room had thinned out. There were maybe 12 people left in the room, and Tomo, it was a birthday party for Tomo and Junko because they celebrate birthdays in early March. And Tomo suddenly called me across from the other side of the room, got me to kneel down in front of her, started tying me up with birthday ribbon, put my hands in a praying position, a namaste yoga praying position, and tied my hands together. And then she got out her needles. And of course, they were medical needles with a cup for the syringe to go in. But of course, we weren't using a syringe, but so the needle has a cup, a sort of a plastic cup on the top of it. Anyway, and she went ahead and she put the first needle, gosh, I can't remember the order. I think she put the first needle in my middle finger, and that was for her. And then she put the second needle in my ring finger, and that was for Junko because it was Junko's birthday. And then Charlie, Junko's partner, also had an early March birthday, and she said, Charlie, you can put the needle in Elizabeth's index. He chose the index finger. He was allowed to choose the thumb or the small. He chose the index finger, but he said, I'm not putting it in the needle. You're going to do that. So she put it in my index finger, the pointing finger. And the shape of the nails is different on each finger. And what was interesting is that I'm going to describe it to you. Why not? And this is all described in the book. In the ring finger, you could actually see the needle going all the way to the wick of the hilt of the nail. And you could see it through the translucent, because the nails are translucent, and you could see it all the way through. The third finger, it was quite buried. The index finger is the shape of the nail. She pushed it in. It came out the other side of the nail. Oh my god! About halfway down. I've actually got a photo of it somewhere. I was going to put it. On social media, but I don't like graphic stuff, so I can't do that. But one day I'll reveal the picture to the public. But it's very impressive. Anyway, she started to move the needle back and forth in my neck. And anyway, but it sounds excruciating. And if I read about it, I would probably faint. But because I'm a bit squeamish, but actually it wasn't the most painful thing that we did. The most painful thing that she ever, I know it sounds awfully painful. It wasn't, it was a bit disappointing, really. It just looked excruciting.
This was overhyped.
I don't advise anybody, I don't advise anybody trying this at home. Anyway, so that was her birthday gift from me. The most painful thing that ever happened was when she made me, in one of the sessions in a hotel room, she made me walk doggy style on my knees. So I was on my elbows, walking on the tips of my elbows and walking on the tips of my knees on my knee pads. So my feet were chained to my buttocks, and I had to walk around the room, and it was a stone floor. And some people, some submissives can do this, walk around in a doggy style quite comfortably, but it was excruciating pain on my knees, and I just couldn't find a position that was comfortable, and I was hopeless, and I disappointed her so much. It was the most painful thing. I mean, when you read about everything else I did, like the needle torture, you'll be surprised, but walking on my knee pads was the most painful thing she ever got me to do. The most excruciating long-term pain that was just unbearable. There was a lot of that.
Yeah, this all sounds like I already feel very exhausted just hearing you retell the story, because when you tell me about the pain that you endured, I can like feel my fingers trembling. I can feel my knees and my elbows start to tingle a little. Yeah. So it can be such a huge like tax on your body. And which leads me to my next question. At what point did you notice the fire start to die out between you and Tomo? That you're like, you know what, this isn't just doing it for me anymore. Like, or rather, what was it? An exhaustion? Was it a boredom? What was the feeling that you were like, this has reached the end of this?
Well, it had become, so in the first year, I was with her for almost 2 years, and in the first year there was a lot of physical torture. In the 2014, so I split up with her in November 2014. 2014, I think we didn't even have a session in a hotel. There was some stuff that happened at parties and stuff, but and I was exasperated because I had built this idea that I was going to save her in a big showdown in a session, and I was going to exorcise her demon. And she never called that session. But that year was all mental torture, which was insufferable. I was very good at handling physical torture, but I really couldn't handle the mental torture it was very psychological, deep. She was a narcissist and very manipulative, and she built up my hopes and dashed them time and time again mentally. And I was getting exhausted, but I would have stuck with it unless I had learned to love myself. Now, in March of 2014, I did this despairing because I was trying all sorts of therapy because I knew I was just going insane properly. I was having panic attacks and everything. I actually, at the suggestion of a friend who happened to be the choir director, I went to do a life regression therapy session with a bilingual Japanese therapist. And she would regress people through hypnotism back to a previous life where there was an issue that had come into your cellular memory in your current life. And it's a theory, it's a therapy, it's an alternative therapy, and it's not necessarily something I believe in. However, I thought with an open mind, let's try it. I was desperate. And she took me on this session, and I had this amazing flashback to a time in the mid 1600s, 1500s. I was in an Eastern European village, and I was a mentally disabled man, and I lit the pyre under the stake for these witches that they were burning. And Tomo, in a previous life, had been a witch, and I had burnt the stake under her. So I was one of her assailants in this previous life. Anyway, during this session, I had this amazing outpouring of emotion when I saw this image. And it may be something I just conjured up. It may have been something I imagined, but the what isn't very important, or how I got there. But the emotion that I shed during that session was so powerful and so incredible that I felt like a new person. I felt lighter in weight. I felt like so many strips, so many onion layers had been stripped away from doing this session. Now, whether or not I was in a past life a mentally disabled man who lit a stake under Tomo, I don't know. But the reaction to thinking that I was and how that shed emotion for me was incredibly powerful. And from that point in March of 2014, that's when I started to allow these green shoots of self-love to grow inside me. And what happened is, in the last 6 months of my relationship with Tomo, is we started to go out of sync. So I said that it was a 24/7 relationship, with the understanding that I was committed at work and I committed to work commitments. Socially, I was expected to drop everything at her beck and call. But until March of 2014, everything that we did together kind of synced up. So if she called me across town at 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, I could go because I had no other prior engagement. So I didn't have to cancel on anybody at short notice. But once I started to grow in self-love, we started to conflict. The synergy, the synchronicity wasn't there anymore. And it slowly increased more and more and more. And my body, these shoots, started to really call out, she's torturing me. You don't deserve this. You deserve better. And one step and another. And I was doing other therapeutic things along the way, other kinds of conversations and just books that I was reading, whatever it was. You get the best advice from all sorts of media. And I just started to really learn to love myself and recognize that this relationship wasn't right for me. So I still loved her, but I recognized myself and loved myself. So I had to back out of the relationship. So it wasn't that I was bored. It wasn't that it fizzled out. It was that I grew to love myself and had to pull myself from the situation where I was being constantly afflicted, because I loved myself. And that was how it happened. So when I told her I'm leaving her, I can't be your slave anymore, I actually made her a huge gift. I made a mosaic for her to say thank you. You've saved me. You've helped me learn to love myself. And thank you for what you've done. But because of what you've done, I have to leave you. I can't be in this relationship anymore. And I think she understood that. She was very devastated when I split up with her. And it wasn't until I split up with her that I realized just how much she cherished me. It was one of those things. I mean, her reaction when I split up with her really surprised me. I thought, God, if you were that interested in me, why didn't you show it more? But anyway, she was devastated. But to be honest, I think she was only devastated for about 10 minutes.
As a narcissist to do.
Yeah, quite. She got over me very quickly. Japanese are very stoic anyway. They get on with their lives. They're very stoic people. I think it's partly because of the nature of earthquakes and stuff. I really love Asians. I mean, Asians live life as if it's a privilege. Westerners tend to live life as if it's an entitlement. There's a stark contrast between the two. And I really love Asians. When you go to the Philippines, Thailand, everyone is so beautifully hearted and grateful for life in a way that Westerners are not. We're very spoiled. Anyway, so Tomo probably got over me very, very quickly. I took a much longer time to get over her. I took a best part of 2 years to properly get over her. Even though I knew it was right to not be with her anymore, but I had so much processing to do, and writing the book was part of the cathartic process. And I probably couldn't probably say I was completely over her till about 2 years after splitting up with her.
And I mean, it is still very much a healing process, even after how many years after the events of the book. And you do end the book with a very nice note where you imagine like Stephen Fry patting you on the shoulder, and like
that's right.
Really
it says,
sweet.
let it go,
Yeah,
dear.
let it go. And that's beautiful. So where do you see yourself on your own sexual journey now and your own BDSM journey? And have you like kept up with any of these like figures, these prominent figures in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still very much in touch with Junko, very good friends. I will be seeing her this weekend. She's got a party, a big fetish party. I still go to fetish parties. I still like rubber, latex. I love bondage, but I won't enter into an enslavement relationship. And if I do any play with the whip, it will be very soft, just for fun there and then, not to enter into a long-term relationship. I'm actually now living with my sweetheart, and we are in a very loving relationship. She's a Japanese woman, a little bit older than me, absolute darling, really lovely, beautiful woman. She's not into S&M at all. She's not into bondage. Occasionally she pinches my nipples just for fun. She thinks it's funny. I think it's quite funny.
Dabble with it.
Yeah, but she's we're just regular lesbians and living together, fantastic companions. And I'm 52 now. I have to say, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a woman, I don't know, but I don't really need that much sexual stimulation anymore. I mean, I did a lot of stuff in my 30s and 40s, and for me the most important thing is just having a happy companion. Simple things like, well, you're in the airport and you're in a queue and you need the toilet. If there's two of you, one of you can keep your place whilst you go across the airport to the toilet. I mean, just little simple things like that. Companionship is so important. And we've been together now for 5 years. And quite literally, it was after I learned to love myself that these opportunities started to come. And I stopped getting into situations where I set myself up to fail. I mean, that was a lot of it. I used to set myself up to fail. I would fall for straight women who were maybe bi-curious but would ultimately disappoint me because my subconscious was setting me up to fail. And all of that stopped. And life just became so easy. So in terms of my BDSM sexuality, yes, I still absolutely love bondage. And, if I'm fantasizing, that's what I think about. But I don't really, I'm not going into an S&M dominatrix, sub-dominatrix relationship. I have no intention of going there again. That was it. That was my time. It was the therapy that I needed at the time. So I'm very grateful that it happened. And I'm actually, I'm still in touch with Tomo as well. I mean, I will probably see her at this party this weekend. And, we couldn't really handle each other's company like for the first couple of years after the relationship, but now we're just kind of friends again. I mean, when she took me on as her slave, she said that's like, it's a chemical process. She can't reverse it. She can't be my friend again. But I think we've both matured and let bygones be bygones. And she sometimes still tries to play with me, and I have to be a little bit careful about what I let her do. But there's an understanding between us. We're I would call us acquaintances. There's no grudges. I don't hold anything. She doesn't hold anything. So it's quite nice, really. And I mean, she's very hopeful that my book will be successful. She's consented to it. She's signed off a release letter because when we thought we were going to get a publisher, we needed a release letter from her. For all the publishers don't want to be sued. Anyway, the Japanese don't sue. They're lovely. They just say, "Oh, I'm a bit upset." They don't even say that. They just keep it quiet. They're not very in your face. The Japanese, they're very subtle. They everything happens between the lines with the Japanese. Non-verbal communication.
Well, I'm glad to hear that that you've kept in touch with everyone, and you've got like this sort of happy ending, and it is just like such a journey. And thank you so much for sharing the book with the world, Elizabeth. It's an absolute pleasure. And for any of you listening, something to take away most importantly, love yourself and love yourself above all else. Don't forget your safe words. And also, if you ever are in a place where you are finding that special someone in your life, make sure that they hold your place in line at the airport. So,
yeah. So you've got to be. You've got to be loving each other. You've got to be an interdependent relationship where you love each other. You're not codependent. Where you need each other. Mm-hmm. So one of my therapists always says, you're not independent, you're interdependent. So you're connected, but you're living your lives and you love each other and support each other. So definitely learn to love yourself. One of the things that I really wanted to achieve with this book is to help people who are, particularly people who are in toxic relationships. Doesn't have to be LGTB, but if you're in a toxic relationship, I think if you read my book, it can be very helpful to relate to and see things that are happening to yourself. I think we all torture ourselves when we don't love ourselves at a certain level. And I think one of my reviewers, somebody put a comment on one of my YouTube videos about my book. He said, I'm midway through reading your amazing book. I'm a disabled man who cross-dresses, and your book is helping me to unpeel layers about who I think I am. And I just thought, wow, that's a triumph. I mean, if there's one person who thinks that, then it's worth writing this book, if I've helped that person that much. So that was one of my aims with the book.
Well, that's so nice. And I'm so excited to see what the future has in store for you, Elizabeth. And I'm pretty sure the audience is just about ready to read your book. So if you don't mind, can you please plug away what you want our audience to find?
Sure. Actually, So the book is available on Amazon. It's only available on Amazon in all the global markets. They will print a paperback copy for you on demand or send it to your Kindle. So you can get it in you can get it in ebook or paperback format from Amazon. Go to Amazon, type in Exodai, Exodai. You might need to type in Hendrik or Elizabeth to make it come up in search. If you just type Exodai in America, it may not come up because I haven't sold 1 million copies yet. Doesn't always come up in search with just the name. But Exodai Hendrik, that should get you to my book. And you're looking for a beautiful red rose with blood splattered behind it on a shade of grey cover, sort of white grey cover. And incidentally, the book cover has won an award. I just recently found out that the book cover, for how it relates to the content as well, it's won an award as a finalist for the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. And I'm going to be going to San Diego to accept my prize. They don't pay for the trip, but I'm invited to go to the awards ceremony. But I've had to shell out $2,000 on a return ticket to San Diego, which is awfully good fun. And I mean, there's a whole book conference that weekend and everything, so it'll be great exposure. I'll do a bit of book signing too. But we just won an award, so that's very exciting. That's my big news. But it was for the cover. But check out the cover. You're looking for Red Rose. Go to Amazon, Exodai Hendrik, and you'll find a way to purchase my book.
Excellent. And
please write a review.
Yes, I will be including the link to the book in the show notes. Check the description in wherever you're streaming this from. And Elizabeth, thank you so much one more time for being an absolute pleasure on the show.
You're very welcome, Tim. You've asked some lovely questions. Really, really appreciate you as a host listening to me and asking natural follow-on questions. Really helpful. Thank you. He's a great host, everyone. Seriously.
Oh, thank you so much. And for those of you listening that have made it this far into this conversation, thank you for listening to another episode of the Sex Ed with Tim podcast. Do not forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and give the show some love. And with that, I hope to see you all at the next episode. Thanks for listening to the Sex Ed with Tim podcast. Sex Ed with Tim is created and produced by me, Tim Lagman. Music is Aces High by Kevin MacLeod. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at GaySlutClown and at SexEdWithTim. You can also like and follow me on the Sex Ed with Tim Facebook page. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for all your support, you dirty little slut. Mwah.